See, overhead is part of your product costs, but it's stuff that you cannot trace directly to the product. I mean, directly to each unit of product. Okay, so you kind of need to define manufacturing overhead as everything that's not direct material and direct labor. See, like with direct material, you know specifically. Say that we are making these bottles of water, right? We know exactly how much plastic goes into each bottle. We know exactly how much water goes in, how much paper for the label or ink for the printing, right? So we can trace that material directly. We can say, for example, we can say it takes maybe it takes 1/50th of a pound of plastic, right? And that plastic cost at $7 per pound, right? So we know exactly how much the plastic costs for each bottle that we make, right? Because we can determine that if it takes 1/50th of a pound of plastic to make one bottle, and it's $7 a pound, then all you have to do is multiply $7 times 1/50th, and we're going to get some really small number, but it's 14 cents a bottle, right? 14 cents. The cost of the plastic in each bottle is 14 cents. Now you could do the same thing with labor. You could say that it takes, we used to call it man hours, right? But we'll call it, to be gender neutral, right? Human hours, right? It takes, to make one bottle, it takes 1/10 of an hour, right? And you know, the machines are making it, but there'll be labor out there. So it takes 1/10 hour to make the bottle, and we're paying our labor $17 an hour, right? Okay, so that's a direct. We can figure out exactly how much labor goes into the bottle, because it's 1/10, right, of $17, right? Oops, I added another 4 in there. Hold on. So it costs $1.70 in labor per bottle. So our direct cost are direct material and direct labor. Okay. Now you're also going to have other things. You're going to have material that we really cannot build a relationship directly, but we know that it goes into the bottle, right? And I'm just going to use this. Maybe there's adhesive, right? And in some locations we got to put more adhesive than others, right? Some climate, you know, depending on the temperature. That might not be the best example, but maybe there's other things that are materials that we use to make this, but we cannot figure out a direct relationship. We cannot figure out, okay, we cannot drill it down to how much it costs per bottle. So that's going to be part of overhead. That's called indirect material. Okay? So you will be putting your indirect material, and you will also put indirect labor into overhead. Now an example of indirect labor would kind of be like, say there's a plant manager, like a factory manager, right? And we're not only making bottles of water, we're making bottles of water, we're making, you know, the big jugs that they use in the water coolers in the office kind of thing. They've got all kind of things going on, and the manager has to split his or her time among overseeing all these different things, but it's not really set where, okay, I'm going to spend 2 hours looking at the bottles and 2 hours at the water cooler stuff. You know, on any given day it could be a different allocation of time. So there's no real way to directly trace his or her effort, that manager's effort, back to the product. So that has to go into manufacturing overhead. It's still part of the product's costs, but we cannot build this direct relationship.
But if you had just one product, would that manager's labor be then under that number 2 as a
it depends on whether the manager spent his or her time only working on that one product, right? Because sometimes the manager has to do some administrative stuff that's not really related to the product, right? And that would go into your general and administrative expenses, which a lot of times gets labeled overhead. Like in lay terms, a lot of people will call those general and administrative expenses overhead. But in a manufacturing operation, the overhead still is part of the product's cost.
So when you're saying direct labor, that individual, or even direct material, precisely for that product, that's where the labor, that direct labor is being drawn to. Is again that individual's labor in making the bottle.
Right. Right. And that individual,
just making bottles.
yeah, that individual might not necessarily only work on bottles, but we can figure out how much time they spend on bottles and how much time they spend on the cases.
Right.
Yeah.
The jugs.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So those are the three manufacturing costs. And in order to figure out your cost of goods manufactured, you kind of have to be thinking along these terms. Now the other thing about a manufacturing outfit is, like in that problem we were doing, we only had one inventory account for the merchandiser. But in a manufacturing operation, you're going to have 3 inventory accounts. Okay, so you're going to have one, at minimum, raw material, or materials, right? And these are all inventory accounts. You're going to have work in process, sometimes called work in progress, work in process. And then you're going to have, like in the problem, right, we use finished goods. Okay. So raw material is the unworked on material input that goes into whatever we're building. So that would be like this paper label without the print on it, and the plastic, you know, if they buy the plastic in bulk or whatever, right? That's sitting there as raw material. That would stay in the raw materials account until we put it into production. And then when we put it into production, we move it out of raw materials and we put it into work in process. So work in process will be the items that the company's working on, but they're not finished yet. So they're a little further along than raw material, but they're not finished and ready to be sold. Okay? And then when you get finished making that stuff, right? You used to call it widgets, and I never knew what a widget was, but when your widgets are done, then they end up in finished goods. Okay? When they're in finished goods, they're ready to be sold. They've been manufactured to the point where they're ready to be sold. Okay? So versus a merchandising outfit where you just have one inventory account, because all you're really doing is buying the finished items and then marking them up and reselling them, right? In the manufacturing operation, you're actually building this stuff. Okay. So I'll do the skeleton for you, and then you can go back and look at my video on where I actually have numbers in there and we do a problem. But the skeleton, why don't we put this so this is, you can see that it's really not part of the skeleton. We'll just have it here on the side and put it in a box. Okay, so when you do that cost of goods manufactured schedule, right, we're going to start with the beginning work in process inventory. Okay. And I'll do the exterior piece, right? And just like we did with the merchandising, when we do the periodic method, we're going to take this beginning work in process inventory, right? And we're going to add, maybe I put it right here. We're going to add total manufacturing costs. Okay? And when we add that, put this over here, okay, we're going to end up with, we'll call it total cost of work in process. So you take in your beginning work in process, adding the total manufacturing costs, you get the total cost of work in process, right? And then, kind of like that other thing, right, we're going to subtract the ending work in process inventory. So you go subtract ending work in process inventory. And that will give you your cost of goods manufactured. Okay, that's what we're after, right? Now there's some other stuff that goes on inside of this, but you can see that we basically use the same type of formula like we did in the periodic method when we did a merchandising operation. Beginning inventory plus what we purchase minus what we have at the end gives us our, that would have been our cost of goods sold, right? So we're doing the same thing. We're doing it for 3 inventory accounts though. So I just showed you the outside where we're doing it for work in process. Now inside here, in order to figure out the direct material used, right? I'll highlight that. Now we're focused on direct material. We got to do another periodic method, and we're going to start with beginning raw material inventory, okay? And then we're going to add raw material purchases, or purchased, I'll say purchases. So when we add those two, we're going to have a subtotal that we call raw material available for use. Okay. And then, just like following the same logic, right? If we subtract the ending raw material, we're going to end up with the direct material used. So that's one of your manufacturing costs, right? If you look over here, that's the first one. Okay. So now we're trying to get, we're really trying to get to this total manufacturing cost. So that's going to include direct labor. That's 2. And manufacturing overhead. Okay, that's 3. Now, direct material and manufacturing overhead, they don't sit in an inventory account, so we don't have to use that method where you go beginning, add what you purchased, and minus the end, right? You're just going to know that. Like for direct labor, you're going to know it from the time cards. And then overhead, you're going to know it from the other accounts where this overhead sits in, okay? So if we combine these 3, direct material used, manufacturing overhead, and direct labor, that's what gives us our total manufacturing costs, okay? So we could probably put some lines on here. Let's see. That's that. Right. There's a line there. And then when we add these 3, we get total manufacturing costs. Okay. Now, the addition, let's just throw some numbers in to make a point here, right? Say your beginning raw materials inventory was 120,000, and then you bought 45,000 more, right? So you would have 165,000 available to be used. And then say you go out and you count at the end, and you end up with, you got 65,000 on hand. Okay, that will show that you used, and I would put it out here because, right, you used 100,000 of direct material. Okay, I want to line that up with my direct labor, so that's why I put it out into another column. Then we looked at the time cards and we figured out our direct labor cost us 95,000. Okay, and then we looked at all of the manufacturing overhead type costs, and they added up, all the indirect material, all the indirect labor, that added up to 115,000. Okay, so now we got our total manufacturing cost if we add those three. Now I'm going to put that out here because the thing is, I want to be able to add that to my beginning work in process inventory. Okay, so maybe we had a beginning work in process inventory of 215,000. See, now that periodic methodology is actually happening once in here, right, to get to direct materials used. Now it's going to be happening out here at this level because I'm going to add my total manufacturing costs to my beginning work in process inventory. And that's going to give me my total cost of work in process. So 525,000. And then we subtract our ending work in process. Say we went out and we figured out our ending work in process is 300,000. When we subtract that, we end up with our cost of goods manufactured. Okay. That's really, real concisely, right? That's how the cost of goods manufactured schedule functions. That's the mechanics of it. Now formatting and all of that, that's another story. You gotta, probably would format it a little more, you know, header centered and, you know, showing a little more alignment with the titles of each account. So we did two periodic methods, right? We did, take this yellow out of here. We did this one inside here to get to my direct material used. So we'll just give that yellow. And then we did one outside here, right, to get to cost of goods manufactured. So we could probably maybe show it like that. So you can see the two, right? But there's a third one because remember, we have 3 inventory accounts, right? So these two have been taken care of. Now the finished goods, actually, that's something that happens on the income statement, right? Just like it would be in a merchandising outfit that uses the periodic method. So either on a separate cost of goods sold schedule or directly on the income statement, you would have your cost of goods sold computed. So take, for instance, an income statement. You got sales, and then you're going to have cost of goods sold. And if you do the schedule directly on your income statement, well, to figure out cost of goods sold, you're going to have beginning finished goods inventory, and then you're going to add something, right? Now remember, I'll use a plus sign just so it's really clear. Remember, in a merchandising outfit, you would be adding the purchases, right? What you bought to resell. But in a manufacturing outfit, you're going to add this number. Yeah. So you're going to add that cost of goods manufactured. Okay. That's what we're adding. Okay. And then when you add that and you do the math, maybe we'll put another underline here just so we know. then you're going to have cost of goods available for sale. Okay. And then you basically kind of go through that same, right? You're going to subtract your ending, yep, subtract your ending finished goods inventory, and that's going to give you your cost of goods sold, right? So if I draw a line like this, okay? So say our sales was 1.25 million, okay? And then we had a beginning finished goods inventory of 1.7 million, and then we manufactured 225,000 more. So we have a cost of goods available for sale of 1,925,000. You see how that works? I'm just making the numbers up, but you need to identify the numbers when you put this together, and then you put it into this format. Now say you have ending finished goods inventory of, and we're going to subtract that, of, say it's 935,000. Okay. So when you subtract that, that gives you your cost of goods sold. And then it's the same thing, making the right alignment. We want to align cost of goods sold up with sales, because the difference between that revenue, that sales, and my cost of goods sold, you guys remember what they call it? Starts with a G. R. Yeah, gross income or gross profit. So that would be your gross profit. Take that one, subtract that one. Okay. And then you would have all the other expenses. But all the other expenses would be non-product related, right? They would be expenses like maybe the accounting office or the marketing department, right? It would be general and administrative expenses, and it would mainly fall into selling expenses and admin expenses, that type of thing. So you would have all these other operating expenses. Okay. And that's, a lot of times that's what people mistake for overhead. They think that it's, and I guess you could use it in that context in other situations, but in a manufacturing outfit, the manufacturing overhead is part of the product cost, right? We're actually making it part of the product cost by adding it in here. Okay. One other point I want to make is I kind of condensed this thing. You know, you might have several sub line items in the overhead, like factory depreciation, factory utilities, and then you would tally those up. And if you look at my other video in that example, it uses numbers from a problem and how to do that. Yeah.